So I am joining myself from Hong Kong. Been living in Asia now for 10 years, but always kept a lot of focus, obviously, and spending a lot of time on issues related to Russia. As our colleague in Stockholm, Hanna, nicely introduced it, there is a lot to be talked about regarding ESG in Russia. But today we will be focusing mainly on climate. And why is climate relevant? Well, I guess for two reasons, beside the fact that it's relevant, of course, for all markets. But basically, Russia is the fourth largest carbon emitting country in the world. It's also the second largest methane emitter in the world. And it's a country where we probably do not see enough in terms of policy action. So that's a country where a lot of the climate action has to be made by companies and including by push by investors, such as this capital, which has put climate as a really, really key priority in terms of active ownership. So I'm really delighted that we are talking about this topic today. And for this panel that we will try to keep to 30 minutes, and for which, by the way, if you have any questions, you can please use the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that. I have three great participants. So our first speaker is a deputy head of investor relations at Gazprom. So she joined Gazprom investor relation team in 2020, but in addition, she's also covering ESG matters specifically for Gazprom. So that's why we invited her to give us some color on the grid agenda of Gazprom, which is happens to be one of the largest emitters in Russia, is the largest emitter in Russia and one of the largest on the planet. So welcome, Sofiya Kirsanova. Thank you so much. Our second panelist has an amazing profile, extremely qualified to be on this panel. 20 years of, more than 20 years of experience in asset management and investment banking, member of the supervisory board of St. Petersburg Stock Exchange in Russia and Azaka Bank in Uzbekistan, has been working on implementing ESG approach to global investment portfolios at AXA Investment Managers. And the list is long, but one of the reasons we also really wanted to have you, Olga, with us is the fact that you're the co-founder of Russia Climate Governance Initiative. So very welcome, Olga. And our third panelist today is my dear colleague from David Nicholls from Moscow. So David, you spent 1 year in Kyrgyzstan learning Russian. And well, I guess you fell in love with Kyrgyzstan, but also with Russia. And then you spent your entire career working with Russian oil and gas companies, and the last 7 years with us as an assistant portfolio advisor, specifically with a number of responsibilities on the, of course, on some sectors such as energy and financials, but also spending a lot of time working with me on ESG related issues and climate governance. And as such, David is the co-lead investor on Climate Action 100 Plus free engagements, and I'm sure he will tell us more about that, and he's chairing the IIGCC, so basically the European Investor-Led Initiative for Climate Change for any issues related to Russia. So, sorry, it was a long introduction, but I really had to make sure that all our clients and participants today realize how lucky they are to have you guys today speaking about this topic. So, David, I'm going to ask you to please tell us, first of all, a bit more, because as Olga Kimova was telling us from New York that Russia is misunderstood as a market. I'm sure there's a lot of things that Russia is also misunderstood about regarding climate. So can you please just set the scene for climate in Russia?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And hello, everyone. So yeah, I mean, we definitely shouldn't sugarcoat it. As Karine said, Russia is the fourth largest emitter in the world and representing almost 6% of the world's total emissions, if you look at World Bank statistics. So as such, it's an absolutely vital and I think often slightly overlooked part of achieving a net zero world, which is what we need by 2050. And unfortunately, if you look at the sort of climate commitments on a government level, on a country level, they're actually unfortunately fairly unambitious, we'd say. And the main reason is because they use a baseline of 1990, after which time the Soviet Union collapsed and emissions fell by 40% over the next 20 years. So actually, they see an slightly increasing emissions rate emissions levels up to 2030. But having said that, I think while we do think there's not enough going on, there's been a very, very notable change of tone at government level in the last 3 months. And it hasn't been stimulated really by necessarily moral or sort of scientific arguments, but it's much more the economic argument. And really, I think the big wake-up call is the EU carbon border tax. So the idea that actually Russian exporters, which still do represent a big sort of value add for the economy, might have to start paying for their emissions. And that's really jolted a lot of people in the government. And we're now starting to see a lot more action. We're hearing talks about things like an internal carbon pricing framework and things like that. So that's definitely a positive. And on a corporate level, I think we actually see even more action than, we've had much more action than the governments, and a lot more than really the general perception is. And as Karine said, that's driven more by investors such as ourselves, but also obviously the end consumers, because a lot of the large emitting companies export their products. And yeah, in fact, all the exporting sort of the large emitting companies that we own have very good climate reporting, and almost all of them have some form of short or mid-term targets. So I think while we'd say it's far from perfect and there's a lot of work to be done, there is real action going on among the corporates. And that's why I'm so happy that the Gazprom are here actually. So you can hear sort of from the horse's mouth what's actually happening.
Well, yes, and let's do that. Sofiya, you have an interesting role working with ESG at one of the largest emitters of CO2 on the planet. So, and as we were saying, probably a lot of people do not know and understand what the situation is like when you are dealing with this kind of topic. So, Sofiya, can you please tell us where we are, where is Gazprom in terms of climate action and climate strategy in the wake of this global decarbonization trend?
Yeah, thank you for your question. And of course, despite the fact that Gazprom has already produces the transition natural gas, which is kind of I would say perfect transition fuel for the current trend, decarbonization trend. Despite that fact, Gazprom is permanently working on reduction of CO2 emission, methane emission, and increasing energy efficiency. And this process has started not when this ESG topic became so important and so hype as we see right now, but Gazprom introduced and launched its environmental policy in the 1990s already, and from that time Gazprom has a plan for every year to reduce methane emission and to keep the level of methane emission within the below the threshold, which is allowed within the quotes, which are allowed to be released during the year, which we receive from the government. And thanks to our measures, with every year, we managed to decrease the volume of payment which we pay to the government for this methane emission. And you can see this information in our environmental report. And on top of that, of course, when these ESG matters became so popular and so important for investors, we introduced our short-term goals in terms of reduction of CO2 emission and started to achieve them, yes, to reach these goals. But when we realized then this became not enough for our investors, and they wanted to see midterm goals or even longer term goals, we launched our roadmap for CO2 emission reduction and set forth goals for by the year 2030. So these are our midterm goals. And so it was not the end, and that's why this year we initiated the process of drafting and designing the scenarios up to the year 2050. And when we receive the results of these scenarios, we will be able to set up our longer term goals for CO2 emission reduction. But nevertheless, so goals are goals, but even without them, we have measures, we have steps which we implement every year, and we see results of them. So, for example, during the 2020, we managed to reduce our carbon footprint, not carbon emission, not CO2 emission in just absolute form, is in absolute figures, but our carbon footprint by almost 10%. It was minus 8%. I mean, carbon footprint, and mostly it was due to our measures. And one of the measures, I just briefly touch on that, it was implementation of mobile compressor stations, which allowed us to reduce our carbon emission, CO2 emission by 8 million tons of CO2, and it was about almost like half of the whole emission reduction during the year. And this year, 2021, we expect that this effect will be even higher. It will be minus 15 million tons of CO2. And this is just one of the measures that we initiated, implemented, and we saw results of it. So, but on top of that, and in addition to that, we have a lot of other measures and one simple thing that we are doing every year, which we do not announce and do not talk about, is just maintenance capex, which we use to update our compressor stations to get rid of flaws or any defects of on the surface of pipeline, which allows us to at least keep the level of CO2 emission the same or reduce it. So it's already has a huge impact on our carbon footprint, but and it is not included into our capex, which goes to our environmental report as related to ESG things.
So clearly a lot going on, and I'm sure you will get back to you later as well in this conversation. Now let's move to Olga. And Olga, as I was mentioning in my introduction, we really like you at this Capital because first, you're a very nice person, but also we really like the fact that you, together with some other very important, interesting people, started this climate governance initiative Russia, which used to be called Chapter Zero. And at this Capital, we've always considered ourselves, first of all, an owner before being an investor. And for us, a lot of the active ownership work goes with together with cooperating with the directors of the companies and the independent directors of the companies we're working with. So Olga, in that sense, we would really like to hear more about this initiative, what it is about and how it's working in Russia.
Thank you, Karine. Climate Governance Initiative Russia is a local chapter of the global platform that operates under the auspice of the World Economic Forum. There are 20 chapters in different countries like us, and we all have the same goal, is to ensure that the board members and companies' top management are equipped in bringing the necessary awareness, skills, and expertise at the board level. We're sure that board directors should drive an effective strategic response to the climate challenge that their companies face in the long term.
All right, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that as well, and especially it would be good to hear what Sofiya thinks about that, how much pressure they get from investors and the board. But we're going to go back to David, because this is actually a very interesting topic that we've been discussing a lot, and we're working a lot on that at his Capital, related to the fact that quite many, if not almost all of our competitors, or we would call them peer investors, coming from out of Scandinavia, so fund managers basically, have decided to go fossil free. So basically they exclude stock of companies like Sofiya's companies and others. And when you divest, you are not able to engage, obviously. So David, please tell us, what does this Capital think about that? And please tell us a bit more about how you're working with climate action with our companies.
Yeah, sure. So the first point is, I think we can very much see the ethical reasons why one might want to not invest in fossil fuel. At least Capital does have non-fossil fuel funds. But in Russia, very much we've come to the conclusion, and I think it is a general one, that if you want real world impact, engagement is a much more powerful tool than divestment, assuming that you do it properly. And you heard what Sofiya was talking about in terms of how she's listening to the requests of investors. And given how big Gazprom are and some of these other emitters, I mean, the impact you could have is very, very significant, even if you only have a sort of tiny role in the overall sort of part of the pressure group. But if you look at the literature, of course, it shows that engagement only works when you have long-term relationships and you're prepared to engage in the long haul. So it's not the case that you just have one quick Zoom call with the IR and say, got to reduce emissions, and then you just go and rest. It's very much needs to be a sort of multi-year process. And I really expect I'll be here in 5 years' time, sort of still talking about these themes. But of course we think we're very well positioned here. I mean, we're completely Russia focused. We're based in Moscow. We all speak Russian. We understand the culture. And so really, if anyone is going to do this, we believe it should be, and it is us. And we do it. As Karine, you already mentioned, I'm personally co-lead investor for 3 out of the 5 Climate Action 100 engagements. And that's basically the largest investor initiative for climate change. I think it's 55 trillion of assets now, covering something like 80% of global industrial emissions. So this is a really big initiative, and the fact that we're leading 3 out of 5, I think, shows that we really are doing something here. And as soon as we joined, it was quite clear that while there are a lot of climate expertise and people really interested in actually getting something done, including in Russia, you really needed that local knowledge and local presence to actually do stuff. And so I think that's why, quickly became the co-lead, and also, then have now chair the working group, just because of that sort of insight and sort of on the ground approach. And if we talk about our achievements, I think Sofiya already sort of front-run it by mentioning some of the very large numbers that Gazprom achieved. 8 million tons of CO2 just from one initiative. That's sort of 12 or 13% of Sweden's total annual emissions just from one initiative. So, I mean, that gives you a sort of feeling of the impact. But if we look at our portfolio companies as a whole, the annual emissions they've announced of reductions in the peak year is something like 79 million tons of CO2 equivalent, which is around 130% of Sweden's annual greenhouse gas emissions. And so we definitely wouldn't say we're responsible for obviously that whole amount, but we have played a small part. And so we believe we are, and we see that we are having real impact. And we also very much believe there's a lot more to come from really all of the companies in our portfolio.
Thank you, David. So whenever people talk about climate, especially investors, but also now government, we're always talking about long-term targets. 2030 is actually really short-term, but then a lot of people talking about 2050. I specifically wanted for today's topic that we would also zoom in on what's going on right now, because we have clear evidence that climate change is already having an impact on the valuations of the companies we are investing in. So I've asked my 3 panelists to tell us briefly about, and I'm going to just name the topics and we'll make sure that they will be presenting in a short and efficient way. Sofiya, a question about the EU carbon price. In what sense, and clearly related, of course, to climate action on the side of one of Gazprom's main clients, i.e. the EU, what is the impact for you? I've asked Olga to tell us a bit more about the carbon border tax and the CBIM, this carbon border adjustment mechanism, and if she thinks that Russian companies are ready for that. And then I kept also another very good question, hopefully, for David regarding physical climate risk, which is also a very important topic that I think there are not that many investors who are spending enough time understanding this specific topic. So we start with you, Sofiya.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. First of all, I would like to say thank you to David, because your expertise, your, I would say, permanent collaboration with Gazprom definitely helps to increase the level of importance for our management of this ESG topic, and it keeps us. I would say it helps us to initiate some changes to advise probably some changes to our management, because this thing is still new for most of our management and independent directors as well. So that's why sometimes we need some expertise and some push from investors, and we already have a lot of it, and it's really positive, I would say, for the future of the company and for its sustainable development in general. And regarding your question, I think at this point, when we see prices for gas at above $1,000 per MCM, so it's difficult even to say about this carbon price, because in this reality, this thing does not work, I would say, because just in like probably last year, of course, we can calculate that then when we have the price for coal, like, I don't know, 100 per ton, and if we add up this carbon price, so this is the level of gas price which should be like reasonable for the market participants. But right now, so we do not see such equation works, and so that's why I would prefer not to tell about how it will work next even by the end of this year or next year, because we expect that factors which affects the current level of prices will continue during the next 6 months or more. So that's why this mechanism, I expect that it won't work during that time, unfortunately. But after that, so we'll see how it will work later. But also, I would like to add that I think starting from the year 2021, a lot of like market participants who are not involved in the real business, real electricity production and all these like material things, they just speculate on this carbon price. And that's why we see these dynamics, which is not, I would say, reasonable, and it is not based on real factors. So that's why it's also, I think, that we need some time to see how it works and what factors affect on this topic on carbon price. So that's why it's difficult to comment on that.
Okay, thank you, Sofiya. So Olga, what about another kind of happening, the carbon border adjustment mechanism?
Karine, may I make some comments about the previous topic that you just discussed with David, because I think it's quite interesting, because we look at companies' climate readiness and across the board, across the sectors, and I totally agree with David that the companies have made significant progress recently. However, there is a huge difference, not huge, but there is a difference among sectors. Like, for example, the metals and mining sector is quite progressed, is quite developed in terms of climate agenda. We looked at 14 Russian metals and mining companies from a climate point of view, and we saw that they're pretty much in line with their peers, international peers. On that, at the same time, the financial sector, for example, the green agenda in the financial sector is driven by Sberbank. They're a big leader. But if we compare Sberbank with Nordic asset managers or financial institutions or French financial institutions who are the leaders globally in climate agenda, then they're a little bit behind. And the energy sector is more challenging for energy sector to be in the avant-garde of climate agenda. But it's not just a situation. It's in Russia. I think it's a global trend. And coming back to the question that you asked, yes, the EU proposed recently a carbon border adjustment mechanism, or how it's called, CO2 tariff on polluting goods from 2026, forcing some companies importing into the EU to pay carbon costs at the border on carbon intensive products such as steel, aluminium, and fertilizers. And out of 6 major European trade partners, imported goods from Russia will face the biggest CBM fees. And this carbon tax will be introduced in 2023 at the earliest, before becoming fully operational in 2026. So what's happening in Russia? Of course, the carbon tariff is the most discussed topic among Russian companies, particularly in the metals and mining sector and energy sector. However, this issue should be managed at the government level, and Russia eventually has to introduce its own carbon system to avoid paying carbon tax in Europe. Recently, the Russian government has already announced that it started negotiations with businesses on the launch of carbon taxation in Russia, but clearly it's a very, they're just at the beginning of the process, and it's a very complex and lengthy procedure, so it might take several years.
Okay, so worth monitoring very, very closely. David, what about physical climate risk?
I mean, I think I completely agree with you. And actually, for me, physical climate risks are almost more worrying because we can and we do model transition risks in our proprietary model. So I can look at a company like Gazprom or a steel company and say, well, how would the company be affected by this carbon price or this commodity price? But it's very difficult to assess that in a systematic way for physical risk. So, and everyone's aware of what happened in Norilsk last year with the big fuel spill driven by predominantly melting permafrost. So it is a significant issue, but I would say that particularly after what happened with Norilsk, Russians are definitely not ignoring it. I think there's the amount of sort of presentation time and discussion time dedicated to this is significantly higher, which does give us a certain degree of comfort. And for our side, I think what we really try to push is that this is part of robust scenario analysis. You know, I spoke at the chapter at the Climate Governance Initiative event last week, and what I was really highlighting is that the boards and the companies need to do the scenario analysis, not just in terms of transition risks, but also in terms of physical risks. So what do your assets actually look like if the world heats up by 3 degrees? And then those are the kind of questions we get across, but we are getting traction on that now when we're talking to boards and management of companies.
Thank you, David. Okay, guys, we are approaching the end of this very interesting panel. I know that both Olga and Sofiya were telling me that we will never make it in time, and we almost trying, I mean, already approaching the limit. I told them we will make it in time. Sadly, we have not been able to speak about one very important and interesting topic, but we'll keep it for the next time, which is about the solutions that Russia has for climate. May it be, of course, the amazing natural resources that they have in terms of forestry and the number of the mining industry's solutions for the green transition. But as I said, let's keep it for next time. To a final word from each of you. Look, COP26 is approaching. Christmas is also approaching. So I'm going to ask each and everyone to very briefly tell me if you had on your a wish list for climate action in Russia, what would you be your #1 wish? I'll start with you, Olga.
My wish is that asset owners, particularly the Russian government and international shareholders, took a firmer position on the Russian companies' climate governance. And I think they should start with increasing climate expertise at the board level.
Very good. Sofiya?
Sorry. Okay, yes. From my standpoint and from Gazprom, so it would be, I would say, financial support or some kind of subsidies as European companies benefits from. So if we have in Russia something, I don't know, just kind of very small support, or at least, you know, something, so it would help a lot, because right now we see pressure from our investors to increase dividends, to decrease capital expenses, but at the same time they expect from us to see some improvement in terms of CO2 emission, CO2 emission reduction. But of course it demands additional capital expenses at least, and so these hydrogen projects as well, because all investors expect coming results from these pilot projects or real projects. But when we do not have financial support from the government, and we don't see material interest from our partners without this financial support, so it's kind of difficult, I would say, to initiate any project and to be able to allocate our capital properly among all these issues. I mean, all these directions like dividends, capital expenses, and ESG related projects, hydrogen, and all these new things.
Okay, look, we have very good contact with high-level people at the government, so we promise you to. We will tell them about your wish. David.
Yeah, a comprehensive and robust carbon pricing mechanism in Russia as soon as possible.
Yeah, that would help us a lot as well
Yeah.
for our work as a long-term investor and owner of companies in Russia. On this note, I would like really to thank each and every one of you for this amazing panel with a lot of insights. I feel we've learned a lot. We've gone through a lot of important topics. And so thanks a lot. If we were in real life, I think I would even suggest a standing ovation, but I will just do like that now. And we'll also then now have a little break to go and get coffee or whatever you need to do for 8 minutes. And we will reconvene with the continuation of this Russia virtual investor trip at past, so 3:30 in Sweden, and wherever you are in the world, just past. Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.